his scrapbooks up here, I can tell. Anxious to look at them, and I hope you are too. I'm here to introduce my husband, Andy Ward. He has made a lovely, wonderful scrapbook on his father, R.C. Ward, who served in the RAF in England with the Americans in the Eagle Squadron in World War II. And all I did to help him was paper and corner snips and stickers. So he did all the work himself and is really lovely. So here's Andy to talk about how he did it and a little bit about his father's history.
I'm more used to speaking to large groups with this voice rather than with a microphone, although it's been a few years. I'm going to talk to you about the scrapbook that I built and the documentation that went with it and some of the other things that went into it about my dad, who was a long time, well, as a child and a young adult, he was a resident of Fort Worth. His flying career started in 1935 and went through 1947. As you can see here, he flew for 3 different air forces, Allied air forces during World War II, and 2 of them was prior to the entry of the U.S. into World War II. So the U.S. was officially neutral. That was illegal to cross the border into Canada to join the Royal Canadian Air Force or any of the Canadian military services. And so a lot of those guys risked being caught by the FBI, and some were caught by the FBI. What I wanted to do this was for my sisters. I have 3 sisters, and we have 2 sons, and I wanted to build a history book for my sisters because I knew a lot more about his flying history than they did, and it's really pretty extraordinary. I wanted to be able to show his early life, growing up in Fort Worth, and the period where he learned to fly, and his entry into World War II through his service in 3 different air forces. Resources is real interesting, and it was very important to what I did here. My dad never threw away a military document that he ever got through 7 years, or through 6 years, I guess, which was really great because I had all of these original documents from the RCAF, the RAF, and the U.S. Army Air Force. And when I wrote to the National Personnel Records Center, I found out that I had a whole lot more than they did because there was a fire there in 1971 which destroyed all of the records for service members, veterans from World War II and Korea in the latter part of the alphabet. All they could do was confirm his military service, that he was in the U.S. Army Air Force, and send me a certificate of service, and that was it. But I had all these other documents that really detailed everything that he did. Also, the U.S. Air Force Museum at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. If you've never been there, that is a fantastic place, but be prepared to spend all day. If you're an airplane nut like I am, you won't be satisfied with just one day. I wrote to those folks several times. They answered every letter I sent to them with information that proved really interesting, and I was able to embed in the scrapbook. The U.S. Air Force Academy Library at Colorado Springs has an entire section on the RAF Eagle Squadrons. And some of that is online, and I was able to source some information online that I had not seen before that was real interesting. And I was also able to provide them some information that they didn't have on my dad. The Air Historical Branch, the Personnel Management Agency of the RAF, were are very helpful. They answered every letter that I wrote to them, and they sent me documents that I did not have that were real interesting, and I was able to embed into this. There are no fewer than 9 books that have been written by 5 different authors. I think there's more like 12 or 13. I brought 4 of those just to show everybody that might be interested. Those authors did a great deal of research, and there's one in particular. His name is Phil Kane. He's a retired Air Force Brigadier General. Used to be an instructor at the Air Force Academy. I corresponded with him, and he was very helpful in doing, in helping me with a lot of information. Also, last and certainly not least, the Fort Worth Library. Sharon and I were able to find the addresses of where my dad and his family lived in the late 1900s and the 20s and 30s in Fort Worth, where he worked. We confirmed where his dad worked, and my father worked at several different places, as I'll be able to show you here in just a minute. Okay, what was I trying to do here? I wanted to make this as authentic and period accurate as possible. A lot of the documents I had were 40 years old, 50 years old, and so they had that brownish color to them, and some of them were pretty delicate. And I found out that parchment paper makes a fantastic copy of that and makes it look like the real thing, only it's on new paper, so it's not falling apart. Sharon found some Vellum Envelopes, and I'll show you how I use those here. And we were able to get several different sizes so that we could put these documents that I copied into those. She also is responsible for finding some clear plastic pouches, and I think we actually found those at a coin store in Fort Worth. But I wanted to protect the uniform rank and insignia that I had acquired, and those are great for that, and I've got a couple of slides to show you how I did that. From the time I started thinking about this until I handed off the 3 books to my sisters, took about 20 years to gather all of the information, partly because I'm just slow, and partly because I was at the height of my military career at the same time, and just couldn't devote the amount of time to it that I wanted to. The finished document has, or the finished scrapbook, I should say, has 50 photographs, 60 documents, and it's over 40 pages. I had to put scrapbook extender pins in to be able to get them all in there. And when I update these next year, there'll be a few more pages. So this is the first page. I wanted to show you how I did this. This is actually the first page of the scrapbook. It's a letter to my sisters. You can see that it's dated January 2008. That's when I handed it off to them. I gave them a little synopsis of what he did, and just a little bit of the history concerning the group that he was in the RAF. So that's the guy. That's his baby photo. He was born July 17, 1911 in Brownwood, Texas. It wasn't too long after that his dad moved the family to Fort Worth. His dad was a meat cutter, and he went to work for the Armor Meat Processing Plant in Fort Worth, and I think he was there for at least 20 years. He retired from that. This really cool photo of the Barefoot Kid, he's about 10 years old, and he told me that that was taken on July the 4th here in Fort Worth, the July 4th parade. This upper photograph is about, I think, 7 years later. That's my father, second from the left, standing. And from this photograph, we were able to go to the Fort Worth City directories and find where he worked, where that company was located in Fort Worth. And also, the company, this is about 5 years later, I think, very early 30s. That's my father right there. He had learned how to be a machinist and could read engineering drawings and transfer that to milling machines and grinding machines, and he was essentially building and rebuilding automobile engines at that time. Now the flying career starts. He had 6 logbooks. And the logbook that started it all is the smallest one right here. The first entry is 1935. And the last entry in that logbook is 1940, and that's when he went to Canada. This was a little bit of neat information. Sharon loves this, that we found along the way. This document right here actually came out of his Royal Canadian Air Force records. This is their copy of his high school diploma. Now we later on found the original to that, and you can tell that somebody took an eraser to whatever the name was that was there, and they wrote in Dad's name. He had to have 3 things to get into the RCAF, and one was a high school diploma. I, to this day, don't believe he graduated. I think he had to go to work to help support the family.
And he found wasn't from Strickland.
Yeah, this is on the wrong side of town from where they live. So I think he found somebody who he paid $1 to at that time, who was willing to give him their original, and that's how he got into the RCAF and into the war. This is the first page of his Canadian journey, and that's a reproduction, and it's a pretty nice reproduction of the Royal Canadian Air Force wings, pilots' wings at that time. You can tell that's the King's crown. RAF wings now have the Queen's crown on them, but this was 1940. That's his official RCAF photograph. And this is a photograph of the Americans that were in the unit that he was in Canada. They were all they were already pilots. They already knew how to fly, and Canada officially said that they were training other Canadian pilots. They were trainers, not learning things themselves. I think what they were really doing, all of these guys were being taught how to fly bigger, heavier, slightly faster airplanes than they ever experienced as civilians in the U.S., and teaching them some military doctrine at the same time. This photograph is one of his friends from Illinois who went to him on the boat on the convoy over to England. This is a photograph of Dad standing next to the primary plane that the RCAF had for their training at Camp Borden in Ottawa at the time. And I gave my sisters a little explanation of all of that. This empty spot right here is where we had a vellum envelope on the outside of the scrapbook page. And this is the document that was in that envelope. And as you can see, it's dated 4 February 41, and it says secret and confidential. It also has his home of record in Fort Worth down here at the bottom, where his parents lived, 1703 East Linda. Those were his orders getting him to Halifax, and onto a particular boat that carried 3 other Americans. One of them was a stowaway, by the way, another neat little story, and put them in a convoy to England. So now we move into that part where he's in the RAF. That's the official badge of 71 Squadron, 71 Eagle Squadron, which was the first of the 3 All-American fighter squadrons. I wanted to show my sisters where he landed, so this is kind of a rough map that I found of England and the English Channel in France. He landed here, and they immediately took the guys that landed in that convoy way up north to a safe place where they could, turned out not to be so safe, but a safe place where they could give them their first initial 40 hours in fighter training. That is called Sutton Bridge. These were the 2 primary fighter stations where his squadron was assigned initially to this one. I think the name was Martlesham Heath, and then this one, very close to London. I think that was North Weald. This is a photograph of all of the Americans that were at Sutton Bridge in that first initial 40 hours of fighter training. Dad is right here, seated on the left. A guy who's a longtime resident of Arlington, his name is Wendell Pendleton, is right here, third from the left. And this guy over here, this is another neat thing about this group, he retired from the U.S. Air Force in '68 as a 2-star general. So these were the first of the Americans in England. This is his official RAF photograph, and you can see he's got his Eagle Squadron patch on the side, on the shoulder there. That's what this is. And then his Royal Air Force pilot's wings. They weren't quite as fancy as the Canadians. The Canadians had the red in the King's crown. The RAF didn't do that. This is an example of what I used the plastic pouches for, to hold those embroidered envelopes. That was his favorite plane. There's a story about that I don't have time to go into, but it's a pretty neat story. That's him on the wing. This photograph is also pretty historical. I haven't seen this in any of the books, and I shared this with the Air Force Academy and with the Air Force Museum. Of these 8 Americans, the first ace of World War II is right here, and he's standing next to the guy they thought was the first ace, American ace of World War II. It turns out it wasn't him. 20 years later, they figured out that it was this fellow named Bill Dunn. On the right is my dad, and next to him is that guy from Arlington, Wendell Pendleton. And this guy here was their British intelligence officer. He was actually a member of the House of Lords. He was pretty wealthy, from a pretty wealthy family himself. But he was in the RAF as an intelligence officer, and he was their first guy. He later became the governor of the Bahamas. Now we transition into his U.S. Army Air Force career. And again, the use of the plastic pouches for his U.S. Air Force wings and his shoulder patch for the 8th Service Command. This is how I used the vellum envelopes. I wanted anybody looking at this to be able to see what was in the envelope, and this works great. And they can also open it and take it out. This was the Western Union telegram he got telling him to report to the commanding general at Randolph Air Force Base in San Antonio. During his 3 years in the U.S. Army Air Force, he was assigned to training bases in West Texas for that entire 3 years. He was, because of his flying hours, he was assigned as a Air Corps supervisor. And this was common throughout the 8th Service Command. Each one of these guys had about 15 civilian instructors that reported to them, and each civilian instructor had 4 cadets that they trained. The senior or the assistant Air Corps supervisor was responsible for being an elimination pilot for those cadets, and also as a check pilot for the cadets and the other instructor pilots. There were about 100 of these civilian instructors at each base. Now this is a photograph from 1943. This is my oldest sister. She was born in January '43. Right here, my mom is wearing what was called a sweetheart pin, and I was able to find these at a military show and through some other sources so that I could put one in each scrapbook. It was a stroke of luck, believe me. And this photograph is 1944. My second sister, older sister, had arrived on the scene by that time. He's in a different uniform. Dad is in a different uniform, and you can see he's allowed to wear his RAF wings on his U.S. uniform. So that's it. That's just a few of the pages that have really cool photographs or documents. I copied pages out of his logbooks that I thought at least were interesting to me, that told a story. And in a pilot's logbook, you can find a lot of interesting things that tell a lot of stories. And I was able to connect through his logbook and logbooks at the Air Force Museum from other pilots that were in the squadron. Was able to connect certain events and airplanes. Makes it all the more interesting. So that's the book. You're welcome to take a look at it. And that's my pitch.
Thank you so much, Andy.
You're welcome.
And we're going to have all these available in just a little bit. We'll move the tables and you can. I'm going to introduce Carlene. I know you know her. She was here last month. She's kind of a new member to our board, and we're so excited to have her. And she's going to be taking presidency next year, so we're so excited. She's an avid scrapbooker. She's an avid genealogist, and she put the two together. So Carlene, can you tell us some things about it?
I'm going to try not to use the microphone. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. When I started genealogy, my two sisters, had been scrapbooking for a couple of years. And I looked at them and I said, oh no, I don't have time for that. I do not have time to add scrapbooking to it. Well, my twin sister talked me into going to the scrapbook store, and they had a heritage section. And I said, oh, wait a minute. I can scrapbook my genealogy. And it's been history from then. I have a full room dedicated for my scrapbooking. So, new tables, everything. And we want to preserve the photographs that we have, is what we're looking to do. I have done several. This one here is the one that I'm actually doing for genealogy. And I'll let y'all come up here and look. I won't be long. This one here is my daughter's wedding book that I'm making for her. This one I did for my mother's 70th birthday. This one belongs to my mom, and it's one that myself and my two sisters have added to over the years. As our children were born, we added pictures. We've added from when we got married, etc., etc. And so this stays at my mom's as well as that one. These are actual wall hangings because I've gotten into home decor as well. So for my dad's 70th birthday, I started with him as a child. And The paper on the back of here is actually copies of his report cards that I made to look old and used that as the backing. And then the next one, I went up and did him as an adult when he was in the military, and him and my mom. A lot of these, well, a lot of the ones that I'm doing now, I use what they call kits, so anybody can get started in it. If you, and I can tell you a scrapbook place to go to, but it comes in everything comes in a kit, and all you need is scissors and adhesive tape. And that's all you need usually to put, they give you the instructions, they give you everything you need to put the pages together. And there's several in my daughter's scrapbook that I have used for that. Some I have tried to design on my own. But I want to preserve the photographs and have something to give to our children once we're gone, that they can pass on to their children. Because right now, all of the photographs from my mom and dad's family are in boxes. Yeah. And so we don't want that to continue with ours. And by doing my genealogy scrapbook, I get those photographs out of the boxes and I put them in my genealogy scrapbook. And I'm having one for each family, both my sides of the family and both my husband's side of the family. And I'm actually going to take some of Andy's ideas, because my husband's side of the family has very old letters from the early 1800s, discharge papers and things like that. And I'm going to make copies of those and put this into his so that it can be passed down to our children. So, but that's all I've got. It's fun. So that's why I do it.
But key things, you don't necessarily want to put the originals in there.
No.
Especially if they're going to get handled a lot. You want to put those in the same place. Think of acid-free and those kinds of, like the vellum and the plastic for the metals.
Yeah, anything that they do in scrapbooking is acid-free. So you can use it in your scrapbooking and it will last for a very long time. Any of the papers, adhesives, glues, anything like that that you use. So, yeah.
Questions? Tell us your favorite scrapbook store.
It's called The Little Blue House. She is located in Richland Hills off of Glenby Drive. And you can look her up by going to thelittlebluehouseonline.com. And she has lots of pages there. You can buy the pages, she'll even send them to you. You can order them online. And I just went today and got my Christmas ornaments to make. So.
But Michael's, everybody has the paper.
Yes. Yeah, you can go into Michael's and they have a lot of it. So.
Well, thank you so much, Carlene. And please be very careful as you're touching. Most of these, the modern ones, are in nice books. I brought probably what you have in your closet, something you inherited that came down through the family that's falling apart in bad shape. Do you want to share yours tonight?
Oh, I'm happy to put them up there. You know, they are the same thing, falling apart, bad shape.
I think my mom had seen this one. I think her mother made it, and one of the cousins got it, and she brought it back to Mom at Mom's 90th birthday party, and we have it. So it sits on a little TV stand because I can't put it anywhere, and I've gotten, when I received it, I just, had to sit down and go through it, and I actually found some dates in here that I had not found anywhere else. Of course, as they're starting to digitize more records, maybe stuff will eventually get online, but there were some old obituaries that were clipped that I didn't have access to get them, from other states, and didn't know when these people died, didn't know. Sometimes, in an obituary, they'll put the marriage date too. So I found some really good stuff out of here. Don't ever let anybody in your family throw these away. You never know. And like Andy, there's some Western Union telegrams. Kids nowadays don't know anything what those are. And just all kinds of things. But I would ask that you not maybe look at this one. This was my pride and joy. This is actually a tintype photo album that I inherited. I wasn't due to inherit, but the family that did inherit didn't want it, and they said, we know you were probably the most like their dad, my uncle, about caring about these things, so they gave it to me, and I said, I have no children. And they said, we want you to have it and enjoy it. So I have scanned it, and I have put several pictures out on Ancestry, and people are copying them like crazy, and it just does my heart good to know that this is going into hundreds of homes, you know, that it wouldn't have if it had stayed in my uncle's trunk all that time. But when I first started my research, I realized that I had an ancestor who came to Texas in 1839, got a land grant, so he was in the Republic of Texas. And that was it became my little quest. I really wanted to know what he looked like. And I had a great uncle, and by the time I got to visit him, he was blind, and he directed his wife and his kids to pull out these old pictures, and he couldn't look at them and say, but he said, describe it to me, you know. So we finally had kind of picked one that he thought was the ancestor I was looking for, which would have been his grandfather. And so the cousin was going to lay it out, and they were going to make me copies, and I never got them, and I finally kind of quit asking because they said, well, we don't know what happened to it. And I thought, oh, it's my fault. They pulled that photo out, and now it's lost. You know, I was so scared. And I had always asked my uncle, do you know anything? And he'd said no, he didn't know anything. Well, apparently when his kids packed him up, you know, all his stuff got put away, and it wasn't till way later that he did find it, and he said, you know what, and he let me see it then, and it was the only one not really glued in to this book, and I pulled it out, and I recognized it from seeing it at my great uncle's house, pulled it out, and right behind it was a little piece of paper that identified the tintype. So I was so excited, and so that's the one I really shared online. It's been saved lots and lots of times, but these are very delicate. But Andy's brought some things, and here is the book Andy talked about, the scrapbook, if you want to look at that. I guess that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and then Carlene's got these wonderful things, and Suzanne, you go ahead and raise the screen. I'm going to pull these away from the precipice there, and
I think they know where they are, so they walk behind you.
well, I was going to let maybe two sides just in case, but
So they don't fall off.
okay. Okay.
The people.
Okay.
They need to walk in front. There you go. That's good.
Well, I was going to pull them way back, but okay. All right, we've got lots of refreshments. We've still got, I don't know what time it is. I left my watch home.
It's about 10 after 7. 10 after 7.
We've got plenty of time. Take your time, come down if you want to bring yours too, Janice. Eat some more refreshments. I know some of you got in a little late, and we've got till about 7:45. I'll announce we need to, well, maybe a little before 7:45 so we can put our scrapbooks away, but we'll need to start vacating about that time. But come on down.
I don't work in your I do, but I just